I am Claire Morgan, a United States Navy officer, and this is the story of how my father almost ruined the most important day of my life. The chapel doors were heavy oak, and the light from the stained glass windows fell across the aisle in streaks of red and gold. My father, Richard Morgan, sat in the front pew wearing his expensive suit and that same smug look I had known since childhood. He was not there to celebrate me. He was there to measure me against the version of a daughter he had always wanted, and to silently mock the choice I had made to stand in front of him in a uniform rather than a gown. I could see the way his jaw tightened as I entered, his eyes fixed on the 4 stars gleaming at my shoulders. To him, they were not a symbol of respect or sacrifice. They were an insult to tradition, an open defiance of his demand that I just be normal for once. The faint curl of a smile on his lips told me he thought he had already won, that my wedding would be remembered as the day his daughter humiliated herself in front of family and society. Every step I took down that aisle carried the weight of years of being dismissed. My uniform, pressed to perfection, contrasted sharply with the judgment in his eyes. I felt the sting of his disapproval the way I had felt it all my life, a quiet poison meant to make me smaller. Yet beneath the surface was a steady strength. I was not the girl he had ignored at family dinners. I was an officer who had made choices in silence and carried lives in her hands. The organ music swelled and the air in the chapel grew still. The guests shifted in their seats, uncertain of what to make of the scene. My father's smirk deepened, as if he believed this was his final confirmation that I would never belong in his world. What he did not know was that the room he sat in was about to transform, and the definition of respect was about to be rewritten. The words that would undo his certainty were already on their way, waiting just beyond the silence admiral on deck. A few hours before the ceremony, I sat alone in the bridal suite, staring at the white uniform laid out in front of me. It was the uniform I had earned through years of service and sacrifice, yet in that moment it felt heavier than any battle gear I had ever worn. My phone buzzed on the table, and when I picked it up, the screen lit with a message from my father. His words were sharp and cold. "Do not embarrass us by wearing that silly costume." He made no effort to hide his disdain. To him, my career was nothing but a phase, and my uniform was a threat to the polished image he wanted to show the world. The words hit me harder than I expected. For 20 years I had carried the weight of his judgment, each remark like a stone piled on my back. He had called my deployments, distractions, my medals, trinkets, and my leadership nothing more than stubbornness. Seeing that same contempt, written in black and white, on the day of my wedding, felt like a deliberate strike, as if he wanted to remind me that even at my happiest, I was still not enough for him. I tightened my jaw and forced myself to breathe, but inside I could feel the familiar ache of being invisible to the man who should have been proud. The door opened without a knock, and my brother Daniel walked in. He carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who had never once been questioned in his life. Daniel had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my father's eyes. He glanced at the uniform draped over the chair and let out a laugh that cut through me like a blade. "Seriously, Claire," he said, "Dad is going to have a stroke. Can you not just be normal for one day?" To him, my uniform was a joke, a Halloween costume I had chosen to parade around in. He did not see the lives it represented or the burden it carried. He only saw an opportunity to remind me of my place. I watched him smirk, as if he had just delivered some clever punchline, and I felt the old mix of anger and sadness rise inside me. Daniel had never stood in a desert, waiting for orders that might change the course of a mission. He had never spent nights wondering if the people under his command would make it home. Yet he spoke with the arrogance of someone who believed that his corner office and his financial success made him more valuable than me. In his eyes, I was playing soldier, while he was building a real life. And my parents, blinded by their pride in him, had let that story define our family for years. As he leaned against the doorway, I remembered every holiday dinner where his stories drowned out my own. I remembered the vacations he was gifted, the investments my parents made for him while I was told to be grateful for scraps of attention. His laugh in that moment was not just about my uniform. It was about a lifetime of dismissal, a lifetime of being told that my choices were wrong, that my sacrifices were less important, that my victories were not victories at all. I wanted to shout at him to make him see that the uniform was not a costume. It was the sum of battles fought, of nights without sleep, of moments where decisions meant life or death, but I knew shouting would change nothing. Daniel lived in a world where approval came easily, and I lived in one where I had to earn it inch by inch. His mockery was not new. It was only the latest reminder that my family had built a hierarchy in which I would never rise above second place. As he left the room still chuckling at his own cruelty, I looked back at the uniform. My father's text still burned in my mind, and Daniel's words still echoed in my ears. But beneath the anger, there was something else, a steadiness I had learned in the field. They could laugh and dismiss me, but the truth was that this uniform carried authority they could not begin to understand. On that day in that chapel, they would finally see what I had become, whether they wanted to or not. The memory of that Christmas dinner still sits heavy in my chest. Richard, my father, claimed his usual place at the head of the table, speaking as if the entire evening revolved around him. Margaret, my mother, floated in and out of the conversation, smoothing tension before it could spark, pretending not to notice how unbalanced the room always felt. At the center of their attention was Daniel, glowing under the weight of their approval. Daniel leaned back in his chair and told the story of his latest promotion. His voice carried easily laced with self-importance, and every pause was met with nods and smiles. My parents hung on every word about his corner office and his future, as if the corporate world he described was the only one worth existing in. I sat quietly listening, knowing how familiar this pattern was. He spoke, they praised, and I disappeared into the background. When there was finally a lull, I tried to enter the conversation. I mentioned that I had been awarded a distinguished medal only a few weeks earlier. I spoke softly, not out of shame, but because I already knew how it would land. My father looked at me for half a second, patted my arm, and said, "Another little pin." Then he turned back to Daniel, his voice booming again with pride. In that moment, my accomplishment dissolved, like it had never existed, swallowed by the glow they reserved for my brother alone. I was invisible once more, a shadow at my own family's table. That night after the dinner, I sat in my car outside their house with the cold seeping in through the windows. I stared at the steering wheel, replaying the moment my father brushed away my medal with that dismissive phrase. I wanted to believe it had only been a careless comment, so I called my mother, hoping she would soften the blow. Her voice was gentle, the same voice she always used when smoothing over the sharp edges of my father's words. She told me he was from another time, that he did not understand the world I lived in, and that he just wanted to see me settled. The words sank like a stone in my chest, reducing years of command, sacrifice, and responsibility into nothing more than a phase that needed to be tamed. As I sat there in silence, the truth cut through me. My family would never see me for who I really was. To them, I would always be the daughter chasing something too strange, too different, too uncomfortable for their world. Their recognition was a door that would never open, no matter how high I climbed. I realized then that I would have to live without it, and that the pain of that truth would follow me until I built something stronger for myself. The room hummed with low static from the encrypted radios, every man waiting for my word. On the screen, a grainy feed showed the building where hostages were trapped and the SEAL team crouched in the shadows outside. Time was slipping away. The team commander's voice came through, calm but strained, requesting permission to use a last resort maneuver that could save lives or cost them all. Every set of eyes in that operations center turned to me. Hardened captains, men with decades of combat behind them, held their breath and waited. In that silence, I felt the weight of every rank, every decision that had brought me here. My pulse pounded, but my voice stayed steady. Execute Alpha. Send the sitrep when you are clear. The only reply was a crisp acknowledgement, and my call sign Roger, that Valkyrie. The word carried through the room like a seal of authority. It was not a nickname or a joke. It was a name that meant my judgment was trusted with lives. The respect in that room was not born of family ties or empty praise. It was earned in silence through choices that could never be explained at a dinner table. And in that world I was not invisible. I was seen, and I was followed. I sat with my father's message still burning in my mind, the words, silly costume, looping like a taunt I had heard all my life. For years I had tried to fight on his terms, searching for his approval with explanations and achievements, hoping one day he would see me. That hope was gone now, replaced by a sharper clarity. My wedding would not be his stage or his chance to ridicule me. It would be mine. I laid out my uniform again and felt a sense of calm settle in. I would not wear lace or silk to appease anyone. I would wear the 4 stars I had earned and let them speak louder than anything I could ever say. If my family only respected power they could not deny, then I would give them a display of it they could never forget. With methodical precision I began planning. The ushers would seat my officers and SEALs in the front rows, just as protocol dictated. My honor guard would follow every regulation to the letter. The fleet admiral himself would officiate in full dress uniform, legitimizing every choice I made. Piece by piece, I turned the ceremony into a lesson. They thought they were attending a wedding, but they were about to witness a demonstration. It would be the day my 2 worlds finally merged, and it would happen on my terms. The chapel was filled with the soft echo of the organ, each note stretching the air thin with anticipation. Then came the sound of boots striking stone sharp and deliberate. 2 SEALs entered from the side doors, their uniforms immaculate, their steps perfectly synchronized. They marched with precision to the front and took their places like statues, standing guard over the space that was about to become mine. The guests shifted uneasily in their seats. Their tailored suits and sparkling jewelry looked out of place against the sea of white and gold that filled the pews. Rows of military uniforms sat in quiet discipline, shoulders squared, eyes forward. Whispers rippled through the civilians, their voices low and uncertain, as if they had stumbled into a ceremony they did not fully understand. The organ swelled again, and the heavy doors swung open. Sunlight spilled across the aisle, and I stepped into it, wearing the service dress whites of a United States admiral. The fabric caught the light, the 4 stars on my shoulders, shining like sharp points of truth. For a moment, silence stretched through the chapel as every eye turned to me. I saw my father lean toward Daniel, his smirk curling into something cruel. He shook his head slightly and whispered loud enough for those closest to hear, "She looks ridiculous." The words hung in the air, small and cutting, meant to reduce me to nothing. But I kept walking steady and unshaken, knowing the moment he thought belonged to him was about to slip away forever. The silence in the chapel was broken by a single command, a voice so sharp it cracked against the stone walls. "Admiral on deck." The words echoed with authority, and in the same breath 150 SEALs and officers rose to their feet. The movement was thunderous, a single wave of discipline and respect that rolled through the pews like a storm. The sound of hundreds of hands snapping into salute filled the air, a crisp and undeniable acknowledgement of who I was. Civilians gasped, their whispers silenced in an instant. Senators, captains, and commanders stood shoulder to shoulder, eyes fixed on me with the kind of reverence my own family had never given. It was not applause. It was recognition, earned and unshakable. I looked past the sea of salutes to the front pew where my family sat frozen. My mother's hand covered her mouth, her face pale with shock. Daniel's jaw hung open, his arrogance swallowed by confusion. But it was my father's expression that held me still. The smugness melted away, replaced first by disbelief, then anger, and finally a hollow fear as the truth settled in. This was not a costume. This was not a phase. The 4 stars on my shoulders carried more weight than all his wealth and posturing ever could. For the first time, my father saw me as I truly was, and it stripped him bare. He sat pale and trembling, a man undone by the simple fact that his daughter commanded the respect of warriors he could never hope to understand. The reception hall glowed with soft light reflecting off portraits of admirals and glass cases filled with history. Laughter and conversation flowed easily as senators, officers, and SEALs surrounded me. They spoke of leadership, sacrifice, and missions carried out in silence, and for the first time in years I felt completely seen. Every handshake and every word of respect reminded me that this was my world, one I had built through service and responsibility. Across the room, my family huddled together in a corner. Their expensive suits and polished smiles looked strangely hollow under the weight of uniforms and medals that carried real meaning. No one approached them not out of cruelty, but because they simply did not belong. They were ghosts, in a place alive with honor and camaraderie. I caught sight of Daniel staring down at the floor, the usual spark of superiority gone from his eyes. My mother stood stiff, clutching her glass, searching for words that would not come. And my father, once so loud and certain, looked small, diminished by a truth he could not bend to his will. They had no audience here, no control, no authority. As the evening carried on, they slipped quietly out a side door. No goodbyes, no congratulations, just silence as they faded into the background. I did not follow, and I did not ache for them to stay. Their absence did not leave a void. It was a quiet confirmation that blood may bind, but respect is what endures. Years later, I stood in my office overlooking Washington. The city stretched out beneath me like a reminder of the path I had taken. My career had carried me further than I once believed possible, and with each step I earned not just responsibility, but the quiet respect of those who understood the weight of command. At home, life was steadier with Ryan, my husband, and fellow officer who carried his own burdens and never needed me to explain mine. We did not measure love with empty praise or conditional approval. Our foundation was built on mutual understanding, forged in the same fires of service and sacrifice. When I thought about family now, I no longer thought of blood ties or the hollow expectations that once defined me. My true family was the circle of people who stood with me because they chose to, not because they had to. It was a family built on respect, trust, and the kind of love that endures when everything else falls away. Legacy is not what someone hands down to you. It is what you fight for, what you sacrifice for, and what you earn when others stand and recognize your worth. I learned that family is not defined by blood, but by the people who choose to respect and walk beside you. If you have ever built your own family out of loyalty, respect, and trust, I would love to hear your story. Share it below so others can see that they are not alone. In this space, your voice matters, and your story can inspire someone who needs to hear it.